Good afternoon, my fellow believers. My name is Dr. Tami Prince, and I bring you health tips with the nation's bedside doctor, where we have real talk on real issues that affects our communities every day. If you tuned into my first show last week, welcome back. And for those who missed the first show but are here now, greetings to you. You can catch any of the replays of our shows on our YouTube station. Go to 108 Praise Radio. I just want to say a big thank you to my first guest, Stacy Bryant, who really had a powerful, powerful message last week when we discussed cervical cancer. And, you know, that show highlighted several things. One is we have to have regular checkups, but also we have to follow through with those recommendations that are being given to us by our physicians. It also highlighted that you cannot ever be afraid when you get a diagnosis. You've got to confront it because that can be potentially fatal to you if you do not. You know, I'm a firm believer that ignorance is not bliss, and that with God by our side, we're able to confront anything. If you are a true believer and you truly have faith in Him, why are you afraid? You should never be afraid. Our only task is that we have faith with Him. He has provided the medical society with all the skills and resources that you need, but it's up to you to be able to utilize those skills. Now, I want to highlight another hotbed topic today, and I've got two guests on with me that is going to be able to help cipher through all of this statistics and just many myths and issues surrounding this topic. It's the topic of suicide awareness and prevention. You know, this is actually National Suicide Awareness and Prevention Week, and I just wanted to highlight this issue because it's such a very deep topic, but it's also a taboo topic. In light of several recent celebrity deaths, I thought that, you know, this was very, very suitable for my listeners. So hopefully you all will be able to gain all the knowledge that you need to. We're going to provide all the resources during our discussion. If you are going through any mental illness or any thing that is causing you to want to end your life. You know, when we look at celebrities and these celebrities dying, these are people that seemingly have great lives and they have everything that we dream about having, but yet they're troubled, yet they're killing themselves. Why? You know, we put them on a pedestal, but we have to remember that these are real people with real problems just like you and I. All we see is the glitz and glamour. But deep down inside, they are in pain mentally. They only see suicide as a way out. I want to give you some startling statistics on suicide in the U.S. And when I looked these statistics up, I was actually quite frightened. According to not only the CDC, as well as to the American Association of Suicidology, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death and the second leading cause of death in young people ages 15 to 24. Suicide rate as of 2016 was 13.9 per 100,000 people. And on average, there is one suicide every 11.7 minutes. That means, calculating, during this 60-minute discussion, there will be at least 5 deaths by suicide. Now that was crazy to me, and that didn't settle well with me when I saw that statistic. Approximately 45% of suicide victims actually had contact with a primary care physician within 1 month of suicide. So they actually saw somebody, and maybe the signs weren't picked up, maybe they didn't talk about it. White men, 40 to 60 years of age, had the highest rate of suicide at 32.63%. And they account for 77.23% of all suicides. So there's about, per every female death, 3 male deaths. And the method of suicide, The most common is firearms, followed by, for men, it's going to be suicide and hanging, and for women, it's going to be poisoning. Now, another statistic that really hit home was when we looked at where the suicides were occurring, which states had the highest. And it looks like Alaska actually is number one state for suicides with a rate of 26, while D.C. actually had the lowest rate of 5.9. So I want to know why. What's going on in our states? What's going on in these, genders and ethnic groups that is causing us to want to harm ourselves? Another rate, and this will probably hit home for my producer, Caribbean black men actually have the highest attempt for suicide amongst the African American community. So my first guest up is Dr. Joseph Baskin, and he is a staff psychiatrist at the Cleveland Clinic. But I want to read you a little bit about his background first before we start discussing with him. He is actually trained at the Ohio State University College of Medicine, where he obtained his medical doctor degree. He then went on to Gestalt Institute of Central Ohio in Columbus, Ohio, and trained in Gestalt psychotherapy. He completed a residency from Harvard South Shore Psychiatry Residency Program, and he then went on to several fellowships. The first one at Harvard Medical School, where he obtained a fellowship in psychodynamic psychotherapy. He then went to University of Maryland Medical School, where he obtained a forensic psychiatry fellowship. Currently, he's on staff at the Lutheran Hospital, which is part of the Cleveland Clinic health system, and he is published. He has so many publishings, I can't even read them right now. Dr. Baskin, you are just so published, and it is such a blessing to have you on my show today. How are you doing?
It's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Doing well.
Now, Dr. Baskin, you heard some of the statistics that I ran off. What are your thoughts on those?
Like you, it's alarming. I find it alarming. I deal with it on a daily basis. So it's interesting for me to hear it from a statistical standpoint, almost as if it's from a bird's eye view, because every day I'm dealing with people who have attempted suicide or are thinking about suicide. And so hearing the statistics is different than what I'm usually accustomed to.
What are you usually accustomed to? What are you seeing?
I see these people, I see them after they've either attempted or they have made threats that's worried somebody. And so most of the time they're hospitalized against their will. And the patients who are hospitalized against their will, the last thing they want to deal with is somebody like me who's going to stand opposite their intentions of killing themselves. So it's a lot of trying to gather information from somebody who doesn't necessarily want to give me truthful information.
Absolutely. Now, you see this on a daily basis. Why do you do what you do?
I think I fell into it in some ways. You read my background nicely. Thank you, read my background. I trained in psychotherapy and I trained in forensic. And when I was interviewing here in Cleveland, they wanted to open up a high acuity unit because around the city they closed down psychiatric services in ERs, and a lot of ER doctors weren't sure what to do at 3 a.m. with different patients. So they opened up a high acuity unit that would be an observation unit where somebody could see them, rapidly assess them, and then determine what the next course of action would be. And they thought that I would be a good fit because of my dual background. And so for the past 8 years, that's what I've been doing. The turnover is very rapid. The assessments are quick. And it really does involve a lot of collateral informants and trying to determine if a person really is at risk or if they just, had a bad breakup and they wanted to impress upon their significant other how upset they were at the breakup.
Yeah, there's a number of reasons why people, want to end their life. Let's talk about some of the risk factors. um, what are some of the risk factors that you're seeing?
When we look at risk factors, the first thing that's of importance to us is whether somebody has previously attempted. So that's past behavior usually predicts future behavior. That's a very big one. Mental illness, especially depression, schizophrenia as well. An illness of thought disorder is a big risk factor. Substance use, especially alcohol. And now there's a different element, and that is heroin. And the reason why heroin becomes so important is because, especially up here, I don't know what's going down in Atlanta, but here, it's a huge epidemic. And a lot of people will use and they will play with fire. So they may not necessarily want to die, but they don't mind if they die. And they're getting a lot of hot doses up here, doses that, involve fentanyl and other elements that make them overdose. Age, you mentioned age, race to an extent. Gender to an extent, because I see a lot of women, who are engaging in self-injury. That makes it a little bit more, blurs the lines of the gender. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at as we're assessing people. Faith, by the way, is very important. Somebody who has faith and has faith in their lives is less of a risk than somebody who doesn't.
Let's bust some myths, if you don't mind. One myth: only white males die by suicide. Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Now, I did give that statistic about white males between the ages of 40 and 64 having the highest suicide rate. But why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of different factors. First of all, if they're divorced, that makes a difference. If they're isolated, maybe there is a loss of a job, financial difficulties, with the feeling that things can't get better. When we turn 40, it changes how we view the world. As a general rule, people under 40 tend to think of themselves as more invincible. I think over 40, they understand their place in the world, and sometimes that can come with some depressing side effects. But I think there's an element of all of that when it comes to that age group.
Okay. Fact or myth? Suicidal teens overreact to life events.
Suicidal teens overreact to life's events. That's probably true, right? I mean, in other words, they think at that moment that their life is over because they're not with the in crowd, or some object of their affection spurns them. I would say that's true.
Okay. Suicides happen without warning. Fact or myth?
Now that's a very interesting question. Oftentimes, there are things that people afterwards see and they recognize as there being issues. But a lot of people, when they start to contemplate suicide, will go the other way. And they will send the signal that everything is going well, again, because they don't want to make it difficult for them to carry out their plans. But in general, there are warning signals, and people see them. They worry about them.
Now, talking about suicide to anybody will make them likely to kill themselves. Fact or myth?
Myth. Myth with a caveat, and that is, kids today seem to be engaging in all sorts of bizarre things that they see on YouTube, all sorts of challenges. And to some extent, that is problematic. But talking about suicide, I assume you mean talking about it in a way to educate people. And I would say that does not lead to more suicide.
Now, I do have a question. Like I said, when I was looking at these statistics, some of them were very startling. One of them was Caribbean black men in the U.S. have a high attempt rate for the African American community. Do you know why that is?
I could not. I could speculate, but it would just be speculation.
Okay.
I don't. I think that's also very interesting. I don't know about the background. I don't know what that means. And what do they mean by Caribbean? Are they talking about Haitian versus, Dominican? I mean, there's a lot. Caribbean is a lot of different people.
Yeah, they lumped it all together, and that's the question that I had too.
Yeah.
because you always want to know more about the person's background. It could be a cultural difference, that they just did not culturally, adapt to the rigors and ins and outs with living in the U.S. I guess that's always a possibility as well. But that startled me. When we look
Mm.
at the states that had the highest rate, Alaska was up there in several um, of the columns. What is it with Alaska, you think?
Maybe the cold, the dark, the isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I think that those climes, also in Norwegian climes, they tend to have suffer from some depression. It may have something to do with sunlight, the cold and the long winters.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now,
that's just speculation. I never lived in Alaska.
yeah, I've been there, but I've never lived there, so I'm not sure. I would probably have to agree with you that it probably does have to do with climate changes. And I know when it becomes colder outside, more people feel like staying at home. They don't feel like doing things that they would normally like to do. Now, tell me this: are there different risk factors for the different genders and races, or are they pretty much the same?
Yes. No. Different risk factors. That's a very good question. I definitely look at them differently. I definitely take into account the different stressors that they have. So women will come in. Women have very different things on their plate, very overwhelmed. As a general rule, and again, a general rule, women tend to be more caregiving, and they tend to especially take care of everybody else and leave themselves last. And every once in a while, they need, and they find that people don't rise to the occasion because they're always the ones caring for everyone else, and nobody cares for them. And so that puts them at risk. Men suffer a loss of face, I think, much harsher than women do. Meaning, if a man doesn't feel like he's being a man or he's living up to his obligations, that could be a risk factor. Both of them suffer under the weight of drug abuse equally. In terms of race, it's interesting. Here in Cleveland, I find that African American men are the least likely to come forward and to say, I'm having an issue.
You think that's
They
a
won't do
pride
that.
issue?
I'm sorry?
You think that's a pride issue?
Um, I mean, it's probably some pride. It's probably, they're just more introverted. Some of them, it could be a whole host of different things. But I definitely see that. And when they do come in, it does take time to get them to warm up to the idea that this is not a flaw in their character.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think about the statistic where victims had contact with the primary doctor within a month of them committing suicide? And what can we
I'm
as
mixed.
physicians do when we are seeing our patients?
Right. What can we do that invites them to get treatment but doesn't make them feel like they're going to lose their independence or lose their autonomy? And that's a very difficult situation. As in my experience, when somebody wants to hurt themselves, they don't necessarily want to reach out for help, and they may not be receptive to it. On the other hand, doctors start to become people who hospitalize against their patient's will. Then what kind of alliance do they have? What kind of alliance do they build? It's a very difficult situation. It's one of those situations that after the fact always looks like it should have been done differently. Right? And everybody loves to be the Monday morning quarterback after something bad has happened. But when you're living it real time, it's not always easy to know which way to go and how to best intervene.
Absolutely. I have to agree with that. In my practice, I try to make sure that I spend as much time. Now, obviously, we're under time constraints when you've got 30 patients and you have to see them, within a 15-minute window. There's only so much you can do. But sometimes if I can, feel that the patient doesn't seem right, mentally. I will take the time out in that visit to try to get down to what's really going on with them. And then once I can identify what's really and truly going on with them, then that's where my focus of that visit is. They could have come in for something else, but I will change that focus just to make sure that their well-being is taken care of.
Your best efforts are similar to my best efforts in that the more we get to know somebody over time, the more confidence we have in knowing what's going on with them and what we can do to help. Mm-hmm. So what you're describing in terms of developing that relationship with the patient is the most important thing that a primary care physician can do.
Absolutely. What piece of advice can you give about us? What can we do about this epidemic, and how can we help? What resources out there can we provide people when they're in need?
Well, there are 1-800 numbers, obviously, that are nationwide. There are local things. The biggest piece of advice that I give to people is trust your instinct, meaning when you see somebody that you think is going through something difficult, they are going through something difficult. And because we are respectful of other people, we tend not to want to meddle in their business or seem like we're pushing ourselves into them, being nosy. And I would say be nosy. Be nosy with compassion. Be nosy with, interest. And is there something I can do to help you? Look like things are going difficult. Can I help you? Because that can really make the difference for somebody between whether they decide that nobody out there cares versus there is somebody who cares. So act on those instincts. Humans have very good instincts. We know when somebody is suffering. We know when there's something going on that we can intervene. And I would say err on the side of intervening and feeling nosy rather than, I should have done something.
Absolutely. You mentioned 1-800 numbers. I want to give a few 1-800 numbers out. So if you're listening and you truly need to speak to someone, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That is 1-800-273-TALK, which is 8255. When you call that number, they also have an option for veterans, which is a veterans crisis line. So you would just press 1 when you call 1-800-273-TALK. There's also a number of other resources, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center that you can search online, Suicide Safe, Zero Suicide. There are so many different resources out there that I really encourage you to use. If you do not feel like you can trust your family and you need a third party, please reach out. Also, I want to give you our call-in number in case you have any questions for myself or any of the guests. That call-in number is 770-988-6461. Once again, that is 770-988-6461. Please call in. We love questions here.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
go ahead,
I'm grateful
Dr.
you mentioned the veterans. I'm grateful you mentioned the veterans because that's something that I failed to mention up until now. That is a very high-risk population. And they also oftentimes don't reach out for help. And that is a great national tragedy.
My next guest up is actually a veteran. And so she's going to discuss, from her standpoint, what it's like to be in the military and to go through crisis. But Dr. Baskin, are you seeing any of the veterans, or do they all go to the VA?
So I do see them. I see them periodically on the inpatient unit, and I also see them sometimes in my outpatient practice. But my training was at a VA. So when I initially trained in psychiatry, I worked with a lot of veterans.
And from your standpoint, what are you seeing as reasons for veterans not only attempting suicide, but actually succeeding with it?
Well, access to firearms is a big thing. So people in the military are very accustomed to firearms. And with firearms and impulse, they don't come back from very often. In other words, if you take pills, A lot of people survive overdosing on pills, but it's very hard to survive a gunshot wound. And so that's a big thing. The trauma that they experience in combat, coupled with injuries that they might have experienced to their head, especially in the Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, and those two, there was a lot of blasts and concussions that came out of that, and then substance abuse all linked together for a very volatile mix.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. You and I spoke about the clinical side of suicide, but I actually want to bring this closer to home and kind of humanize it. So this is where my next guest is going to come into play, because she knows something firsthand about suicide. My next guest up is Ariel Dandridge of the Veteran Women. Dr. Baskin, I want you to hang on the phone as well, if you don't mind. At the end, I may want to have you respond to some things, if that's okay.
My pleasure.
Okay. So Ms. Ariel Dandridge is a certified life and veteran development coach and is the founder, as I said, of the Veteran Women LLC, a company dedicated to supporting and empowering female veterans as they transition from the military life to the civilian life. Ariel, like those who she serves, is a 12-year Army veteran who once struggled to find direction during her own transition period. Held back by lack of direction and limited resources and personal trauma resulting from domestic violence, sexual harassment, and military sexual assault, she felt alone trying to find her place in the world. It wasn't until she stumbled upon her own life coach that she found the direction and personal determination she needed to move forward, eventually creating the Veteran Women Program. Today, she teaches women how to use their military experience as an advantage to both their personal and professional lives, especially who don't fit the traditional stay-at-home mom or that 9-to-5 role. More than that, Ariel works closely with women to help them establish clear goals, discover motivations, and create plans of action to live a life that they love. Her coaching style is considered solution-focused, transformational, and comprehensive, all backed by a passion to help others find their passion, purpose, and happiness beyond PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Ariel is dedicated to helping her clients reignite their passion in life and to rejuvenate their minds, bodies, and souls so they can move forward in the future with a clear mind full of purpose. Wow, Ariel, you are amazing. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming onto the show and, letting me pick your brain for a little bit and also being transparent. Ariel has been so transparent with me, and she, wants to get her message out, and I want to be able to give her that opportunity. Now, Ariel, I kind of understand why you do what you do, but why do you do what you do? Why? Explain to the viewers and the listeners also, what's your why?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on, and I want to thank Dr. Felicia Phillips for recommending me or connecting us. I do what I do because I've been there. So for the longest in my life, I wanted to be some kind of counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I actually went to graduate school for social work for a little bit. And then when I stumbled on life coaching and that whole aspect, I was like, this is for me. This is what it is. And that's not to knock the profession. But for me, I give it from a different perspective of being diagnosed with PTSD, being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, OCD, excoriations, all that stuff, and actually living through it day by day and helping others and being that listening ear if somebody needs to talk. Because I know it's hard to talk about it, even though sometimes we reach out, we want to talk about it, or we don't want to be alone. It's hard to explain because it's sometimes that I isolate myself and I want to be alone, but I don't want to be alone. And it's hard for people who haven't been in that aspect to understand the complications in that. So I tell people, like you said, I'm very transparent, and that's one of the reasons, that's one of the ways that it helps me to heal and helps me to cope is by being transparent and sharing my story. And whenever I share my story, I tell people, feel free to reach out to me, even if you just need to breathe on the phone. We don't have to talk about what you're going through. We can talk about what you're going through, or we can just breathe on the phone. I get it. It sounds so simple. It may sound silly, but I get it. I tell people they can come over my house anytime. Now, I may not have gotten up and showered today. I may be in my pajamas. The house may not be clean, but you're welcome to come over, even if it's just we're taking a nap or we're watching TV and just, eating popcorn or just talking about random stuff, because I understand how it feels. Want to reach out and to try to reach out and feeling like people aren't listening to you, or they'll tell you one thing and then they shut you off. But yeah, so that's why I do what I do. That was a long answer.
But that was a much needed answer, actually, because you touched on several things. One is a support system, and it sounds like that is much needed, yet not everybody has that. And isolation can be to your detriment. Would you say yes or no to that?
I would say yes. So I recently had an attempt, actually beginning of August. And that's actually when Dr. Phillips reached out to me. But she knows me. She has been my coach before, and she knows me that my big thing is about talking about it. I had isolated myself, and I was feeling alone when I was in the military, and I had my first breakdown. I was diagnosed with adjustment disorder. And I think some of that was going on because I had been served foreclosure papers for the house that I bought. I was about to lose my car. My fiance of 7 years had broken up with me. And it was just in that moment, I felt like I had no reason to live. And it's hard because when you get to that moment and you have nothing else to distract you, you think it's the end of the world. And that's how I was. I really said to myself, why do I have a reason to live? I don't have a significant other. I don't have any children. I'm about to lose everything. And that's when I attempted.
That wasn't your first attempt, though, right?
Oh, isolation. So I isolated myself. And then, so I ended up going into inpatient. And then when I got out, because I didn't reach out to my support system that I have. Because at the time I wanted to be by myself, but it got to the point where I was so by myself that I went into that deep hole. Now I decided to move in the middle of my support system. So most of my support system now here physically with me in the same city, they live in these apartment buildings. So I live right next door to them. So I have the option of isolating, but they will come knock on my door all times of day and night to check on me and just to ask me questions or go eat and different things like that. And they know when they haven't seen me for a while, they're like, come on, what we're doing? Let's go eat. Let's go talk about this, different things like that. And that means the world to me.
When was your first attempt?
My first, I didn't have an attempt, but I was very, very close to attempting. I had a plan and everything, and that was in November 2013. And technically I had gone AWOL, but my thing was I couldn't get out of bed. And whenever I tried to get out of the bed to get ready to go to work, I was still active duty. I would have panic attacks. Back then, I didn't know that's what it was, but I would have panic attacks. So I literally was in my house down the road from the base, just curled up into a ball. And then at that time, I was volunteering, and the director of the court-appointed special advocate program here, she could tell that something was different about me. She came banging on my door, and they rushed me to the hospital on post. And that's the first time I went into inpatient. And I remember her telling me, I know you're going to be mad at me, but you have to do this. And I told her, I said, no, thank you so much because you just saved my life. And thank you for seeing the signs and paying attention to them and taking me to the hospital. And when I was in inpatient, that was probably the best thing ever because I joke and I say I didn't have shoestrings, no TVs, no razors, that kind of thing. So I didn't have to worry about, arching my eyebrows. I didn't have to worry about shaving my legs. I walked around in little footies and didn't have to worry about answering my phone, being on the computer, being on the internet, listening to the news, watching the clock. It's just, I was able to just be. And I needed that so much to clear my mind. And then from there, when I got back to the unit, it was still tough because that was the first time I got medications for psychiatric reasons. And just that transition back into active duty and, dealing with, because I became agoraphobic, so social anxiety is high. And that was part, so I asked them to chapter me out of the military. And then once I got out and I started learning about what I went through and understanding my diagnosis, I said, you know what, I want to be the person who people know that they can call or talk to at any time, any day or night, and I'll be there to listen. Because I know how it feels to reach out and people just ignore you. And I never want another person to feel like that again.
How was it trying to navigate through the military system with this diagnosis?
So I was originally active duty, and like I said, they diagnosed me with adjustment disorder and with anxiety and depression. And then as I transitioned out, I got chaptered out, and as I transitioned out, I immediately did my paperwork for the VA system. And then so Topeka, I've been told that Topeka, Kansas VA is one of the best in behavioral health. I don't know. I've had good experience with them so far. So when I did my paperwork for the VA, I told them everything that I had gone through in the military. I even talked about me being in Iraq, which I never talked about to anyone. I talked about my military sexual trauma, which I didn't talk to anybody about. And they ended up diagnosing me with PTSD, with anxiety, depression, and a whole bunch of other stuff, as well as some physical ailments. And then with that, so I enrolled in VA healthcare. I get my disability. And so I see VA regularly for meds and therapy and different things like that. I haven't been to regular therapy in a while. I just, since my last situation, like I said, it was about a month ago, I found a doctor who I feel is a good fit. And so I'm seeing her probably every other week or so. But right when I got out of inpatient, because I had a suicide attempt, I had to go to the VA every week for 30 days. And now I'm on the every other week plan, unless I need to see her more often.
Now
and finding a provider that...
Go ahead. I was going to talk about you finding a good provider, and I think you were getting ready to segue into that.
Yes, ma'am. And finding a provider that is a good fit is very important. One thing is whenever you have a diagnosis, and I know we don't like labels. I know we don't like to say, I have this or that, but understand your diagnosis and how that shows up in your life, and find that provider that you feel comfortable talking to, that you feel understands you and listens to you, and that is very important because you have to be your own advocate. And because when you're able to advocate for yourself, then you're able to get the right medications or get off the wrong medications or find the right provider and get the right help and treatment that you actually need.
Yeah, I think that's key.
I can talk all day about this.
I think that's key. You know, you have to be your own advocate, and that's what I preach all the time. That's what the nation's bedside doctor is all about, is making sure that you understand everything that's going on with you so that you can get the proper help. You know, you and I actually talked about your struggle with finding a good fit for a provider, and you talked about how you actually got along better with medical doctors versus other clinicians. Why do you think that is?
I am not sure. I haven't figured it out yet. But now I had a nurse practitioner. And before all of this, right when I got out of the military, for 3 years, I had a nurse practitioner that I would see, and he was amazing. And maybe it's just the luck of the draw and how people have been when I talk to them. But with a psychiatrist, I'm able, because I have a background in like psychology and all that stuff. And my grandmother, I helped her get her Med Aid license. So I'm kind of up to date on that kind of stuff more than a lot of people. So whenever I sit in with a psychiatrist and they talk about my meds, I'm like, okay, why are we changing? And how is this different than this? Or how is this going to augment this? And then also I get the therapy as well. So I think it's the dual thing speaking to one person. And the provider that I have now, she's been doing this for like 40-something years. And she happens to be Filipina. And so we've laughed about, the Philippines and stuff because I told her I'd been there. Talked about food. She loves food. And then I feel like she really listens. And that's the biggest thing. And I told her that. I requested her, even though she may be leaving in 90 days or a few months, I said I needed you because I needed somebody who I felt listened to me. And that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that's key, and that it doesn't matter if you're a MD like myself and Dr. Baskin or you're a mid-level provider. You got to listen to the patients. That's key in getting them to trust you, and that's what it sounds like, is that you found somebody that you can trust, and therefore, no matter whatever you're going through, she's not going to judge you. And I think that's what a lot of people who have mental illness, they're fearful of people judging them. And there's only one judge to me, and that's God Almighty. So, I don't have room to judge, and neither should anybody else. Dr. Baskin, can you speak to the differences between the training for us as medical doctors versus mid-level providers like nurse practitioners? I see a lot more of nurse practitioners in psychiatry than I do psychiatrists. And I know down here I always have a hard time trying to find a psychiatrist. Why is that?
A couple of things. One is a shortage of psychiatrists, and the training that a nurse practitioner goes through. Obviously, she goes through nursing school first, and then she does additional master's level degrees in psychiatry or in other areas. And it's a training. It's a difference in training, difference in experience. But I think your guest said something very good, which is that what is most important is the fit between people. That really is the fit and trust are the most important things, more so than degree.
Yeah, and I always tell patients I may or may not be a good fit for you, and that's okay. It is what it is, but what I do is I speak the truth, and I try to do that from a position where I'm not going to treat you any differently than I would treat a family member. I don't think I'm any better than anybody else because I'm a physician. And, you have to get, once again, the trust factor, and people trusting you with their deepest, darkest secrets. Nobody wants to tell anybody, they're, wanting to commit suicide because they broke up with their boyfriend, because they're gonna think that, I sound stupid. Well, no, that's not true. That is something that is very real and very hurtful, and you have to trust somebody without judgment. And I'm glad that you,
I
Ariel,
think
found
that,
somebody like that, because that to me is the difference between life and death.
and I noticed that I gravitate towards older providers, because by the time they've been doing this for a few decades, um, they've seen and heard it all, and they've experienced life, and life's ups and downs, so they can understand or grasp better how, one thing for one person may seem like nothing, and then that same thing for another person could be like feel like there's no hope in the end. Um, so I see that I do gravitate towards older providers.
What one piece of advice do you have for our listeners, Ariel?
If you are in the point where you're depressed, you feel like there's no hope. I know sometimes we don't reach out, and I know it's hard to reach out, especially for veterans, and especially those who've reached out before and they feel like they've been let down. Feel free to reach out to me. My number is 888-849-6111. You can text that number. That's 888-849-6111. And I'm here to listen, like I said, even if you just need to breathe on the phone. And then for those who have family members or loved ones or friends who they're worried about, first of all, don't take anything personally. When I got out of the inpatient, I called a friend of mine, one of my support systems, and I told her, I said, please come get me. I don't want to be alone, but I don't want to talk about it. I ended up talking about it for 4 hours, but she didn't take offense to it. And then I told her, I said, I'll probably isolate. I stayed over her house. And I was like, sometimes I may not want to talk. Sometimes I may just want to sit in the room. And she didn't take it personally. She was like, okay. And she knew when I walked off and walked into the room, I just needed my space. But at the same time, I knew she was there and she wasn't going to let anything happen to me. So it's a crazy balance of giving someone their space, but also being a listening ear. For me, if somebody pressures me to try to talk about it, it doesn't work. It's just be there, be my friend, and when I call out and need you, then just be there to listen, even if I'm not saying anything. Even if it's just us talking about, I'm a foodie, even if it's just us going to get ice cream or something to eat, because that's when I'll start to open up. And Chris Cuomo said something, and I know I sent it to you, Dr. Tami, and he said we expect people to reach out, like the hotline numbers. Like I have the wristband for the suicide hotline on my wrist. I've been wearing it for the last 4 or 5 years.
That is so smart.
But I didn't reach out. And my doctor the other day, she asked me, she said, why didn't you call? I said, because I'm not. And I don't know why, but I can't explain. I'm not going to call that hotline, probably because I know it'll set me off if I have to be put on hold, or if somebody tries to act like they know everything and stuff. I just need somebody to talk to. I don't need somebody trying to diagnose me or tell me about the chemicals and all that stuff. I just need a friend. And I didn't want to call a hotline and go through all that stuff. It's hard. I don't know. It's hard to explain. And that's why I just tell
it very
people.
Nicely.
Thank you. And that's why I just tell people, just call me. I get it. We can talk about it. We don't have to talk about it because I get it.
Dr. Baskin, you've heard Ariel's story. Where do you think, hearing from a patient standpoint, her story and her transparency?
It's very important, very brave, and I often tell people that some of the best support they can get are from support groups of others who've shared similar experiences. And peers are so good at calling each other out on either things that they're not talking about or just giving support that therapists or other clinicians can't do. So peer support groups are wonderful.
Oh, with that, I want to plug NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I absolutely love that organization. I've been connected with that organization. And one of the things is most of the people who are a part of the organization, well, all the people who are a part of the organization are either dealing with mental illness or have family, friends, and loved ones dealing with mental illness. So when you go to a meeting or when you go to a training or when you're around them, there's no judgment because we're all dealing with something. I highly recommend people reaching out to NAMI.org, NAMI.org, and find your local peer support group and training and stuff. They even have things for family members to understand, to kind of vent, because family members and caregivers go through certain things as well. So to be able to vent as a family member with another family member, and also to kind of understand what your loved one is going through who has been diagnosed with a mental illness.
Absolutely. I want to give the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number once again, 1-800-273-TALK. That is 8255. Once again, 1-800-273-TALK. You know, this has been so enlightening to me, and it's very near and dear to me. I don't personally have anyone that I've known to commit suicide, but I know people, obviously, who have attempted. And, you know, for me, it hits home, and I hope for my listeners, it also hits home as well. Everyone has something going on with them, and sometimes they just need that friend. Sometimes they just need somebody to bounce something off of, and just be there. Just be there for that person, is all I can say. Dr. Baskin, can you give out your information to those who may be in the greater Cleveland area?
Well, I am at the Cleveland Clinic, and we are available, you know, essentially if there's any issue, you can go to any ER or call EMS or anything and just get into the hospital system, and they'll direct you to our hospital. We have 100 beds actually at our hospital, so a big hospital and lots of providers.
You also just wrote a book. Tell me about that book.
I did. It's a fiction about essentially a psychiatrist dealing with the after effects of suicide. It's a thriller type, so it's supposed to be entertaining, and it's not supposed to be heavy. It's supposed to be just a good read. It's called Exit Strategy, and it's really about people and the secrets they keep and the guilt they feel, and what happens to the people who survive a suicide attempt, you know, from the outside.
How can we get your book?
It's available through Amazon, as is everything else in this world.
Amazon, Exit Strategies.
Exit Strategy, yeah.
Yes, I unfortunately am a Prime member, so I know all too well about Amazon. I probably shouldn't know about Amazon. But, you know, this has been a really enlightening discussion, and it definitely needs to be continued beyond our 60 minutes together. You know, the main takeaway points: never be afraid to seek help. And you're not alone. You know, there are many, many resources. There are many, many people out here to help you. And there are actually people that feel just like you. You know, a lot of times people think, you know, I'm just the only one that feels this way. But no, you're not alone. I leave you with, you know, several resources. I talked about the National Suicide Prevention Line, also the Veterans Crisis Line, which is through the National Suicide Prevention Line. Ariel has given NAMI, NAMI.org. Utilize these resources. They are here. They help. Would either of you want to say any other parting words?
I would like to say they can also reach me at theveteranwoman.com, theveteranwoman.com. And on my podcast, I talk more about just the things that veterans and even non-veterans go through, dealing with mental illnesses, dealing with being LGBTQ, and all kind of things on the podcast. So the discussion continues there. Veteranwoman.com.
Dr. Baskin?
Yeah, I would like to say that what Ariel is doing in terms of how she's working on helping other people is the best thing that a person can do. It's the highest. It's called altruism, and it's a wonderful way to both give back, to feel better about oneself, to create a broader community. It's an excellent model for what a person can do.
And thank you for what you do as well, because I believe we do need medical doctors and providers to also help us to understand the chemical imbalances and how trauma affects our brains and all that good stuff. So thank you for what you do, you and Dr. Tami.
And I thank you both for just coming on and being transparent. You know, Dr. Baskin talking about it from the clinical standpoint, and Ariel talking about it, you know, from a patient standpoint, and how you've been able to navigate through your diagnosis and through the military system. You know, sometimes the military gets a bad rap with caring for their soldiers, and it sounds like you've actually gotten some very good assistance, Ariel, from that. So kudos.
But I do see how it can be frustrating. I will say that.
Yeah, you just have to persevere, I think, and not give up. And, you know, that's where you come into play, because you've navigated this system before. So you can help those who are, you know, coming after you a little bit better, just knowing what you know.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to leave you with this scripture reading taken from James chapter 5, verses 14 through 16, which reads, "Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with the oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of the righteous person is powerful and effective." Until next Saturday at 2 p.m., please have a great week. Many blessings to you. Please use your resources. They are here. Once again, this is Dr. Tami Prince. I am the nation's bedside doctor, and you've been tuning into Health Tips with the nation's bedside doctor. Take care.